Nice to see everybody else from the Cape Cod League. So tonight, Sue had asked me to talk about expanding access to the ballot and sort of compare what's happening in other states with what's going on in Massachusetts. So that's what the goal is for this evening. So I'm going to start by reading a quote, and this quote was given by an Arizona state legislator who made these remarks to CNN in early March. And I think it really sums up the current crisis affecting democracy and voting rights right now. So he said, Democrats value as many people as possible voting, and they're willing to risk fraud. Republicans are more concerned about fraud, so we don't mind putting security measures in that won't let everybody vote. But everybody shouldn't be voting. Not everybody wants to vote. And if somebody is uninterested in voting, that probably means that they're totally uninformed on the issues. Quantity is important, but we have to look at the quality of votes as well. So, as I said, I think that really sums up just about where we're at this current moment. And, you know, everybody on this call knows that the League of Women Voters is nonpartisan. We don't support candidates or political parties, but we do support or oppose actions taken by elected officials, no matter what their party. So empowering voters, defending democracy is the League's mission, and we'll call out any action that endangers that mission. So right now, Republicans nationally and at the state level are taking steps that reduce access to voting, fueled by false claims of voter fraud in the 2020 election. And the League is challenging those actions because of what they will do, not because of the party that's endorsing them. So let me just bear with me for a moment. I gotta get over to my slide presentation. And let me just share my screen. Hang on one second.
Patty?
Yes.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
I just forgot to tell people, if you have questions as Patty's going along, if you could just put them in the chat and we can address them later. Thanks.
So can you guys see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So sorry, I missed the first two. So here's our mission statement: empowering voters, defending democracy. Everybody knows that. So let's just talk now about voting rights at the national level. There are two important bills which have passed the House of Representatives and are pending in the Senate. The For the People Act, which is HR 1 and now S1, to boost voting rights, and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which is S4263, which would restore the protections the Supreme Court removed from the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So the question is whether the Senate will have the votes to pass these bills, and whether the Senate will do away with the filibuster rule that would require 60 votes. So as the new Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock recently said, reporters keep asking Democrats if they will overturn the filibuster when they should be asking Republicans if they will be supporting voting rights. So on your screen now that's a summary of the For the People Act, and a lot of the information I'm going to give to you is pulled from the Brennan Center for Justice. They do a great job at sort of breaking all this down. So this is where I'm getting this information. So modernizing voter registration would fix many of the outdated and cumbersome systems in place around the country. There are about 20% of eligible Americans who are not registered to vote. And the US is the only major democracy that puts the registration burden on the voter. So automatic voter registration helps fix that. Under automatic voter registration, which Massachusetts enacted in 2018, eligible citizens are automatically registered to vote when they interact with the Registry of Motor Vehicles and some other government agencies like Mass Health. Same-day registration allows voters to register and vote or fix errors in their registration and vote during the early voting period and on election day. So you get there, you register, you vote the same day. It cuts down on the need to file a provisional ballot if there's an error in your voter registration. So the Brennan Center has calculated that more than 17 million voters were purged from the voting rolls nationwide between 2016 and 2018 after the Supreme Court overturned the enforcement section of the Voting Rights Act. Over that same period, the median purge rate in jurisdictions previously covered by the Voting Rights Act was 40% higher than the purge rate in jurisdictions that were not covered. The For the People Act would, among other things, prevent removing people from voting rolls for failure to vote in an election. So I think we can all agree that no one should show up to vote and learn that they've been removed from the polls because they sat out a few elections. People have the right to vote and the right not to vote. Eligible registered voters should remain in the system. And that's especially true in Massachusetts, where failure to fill out your annual town or city census can jeopardize your voter registration. And the other provisions of this bill are equally critical, including stronger mail voting systems, a requirement for in-person early voting, and restoring voting rights to people who have served their time for a felony conviction. Voting by mail is safe and secure. Allegations to the contrary were disproved in every instance in 2020. Voting by mail was hugely popular in the 2020 election, with 116 million people, 73% of the electorate, casting their ballots before election day. But 8 states still require a witness signature or a notary on a mail ballot. And in 28 states, mail ballots can be rejected on technicalities without any notice to the voter or opportunity to correct the defect. I don't know if any of you saw the film Rigged, but that was a great example of, I never knew this, but it sort of showed how challenges to ballots happened. And it was unbelievable to me that people who were having their ballots challenged weren't even in the room. So protecting against deceptive practices includes increasing criminal penalties for false and misleading statements, reforming campaign finance laws, updating voting infrastructure, providing for post-election audits, and critically, redistricting reform. Redistricting is another major issue that you probably know that the League of Women Voters is involved in, and I urge you to become familiar with the process, which is right now underway in Massachusetts, and particularly to attend the public hearings that the legislature's redistricting committee will be holding in each of the congressional districts. We're putting those on our website. It's under our people-powered fair maps right on our homepage, so you can find out when the hearings are for your area. And so next we go to the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Everybody knows that the Voting Rights Act was enacted in 1965. It prohibited racial discrimination in elections, and the landmark law is considered a signature achievement of the civil rights movement. But the Supreme Court's 2013 holding in Shelby v. Holder significantly weakened the VRA's protections, clearing the path for states to pass laws that disenfranchise voters and discriminate against voters of color. The Shelby decision removed Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, also known as pre-clearance, which had required states and jurisdictions with a proven historical record of discriminatory voting practices to obtain certification from the Department of Justice that the proposed changes were not discriminatory before making those changes to election procedures. And now, as you know, that's all been done away with. So the Brennan Center points out that the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act is responsive to what the Supreme Court's Shelby decision said needed to be done. It has a new coverage formula that looks at more modern issues of discrimination. It has a provision that looks at particular practices that have been trouble in the past and sets forth criteria for those practices that are subject to pre-clearance. So it has procedures for states or jurisdictions to show that pre-clearance doesn't make sense for them anymore. It has additional notice and transparency opportunities, and it sets forth practices for federal observers so that voters get support from the federal government if there are problems on the ground. So what can you do? We're telling people to email or call your representative in Congress, in Senators Warren and Markey, and thank them for their support of both of these bills. And if you know anybody in states where the senators are not supporting the bill, ask your friends to call their senator and encourage them to support, strong voting rights measures. So voting, now we're going to turn to voting rights at the state level. Each year, the Brennan Center publishes regular roundups of voting legislation around the country. And as of February 2021, legislators in 43 states have carried over, pre-filed, or introduced more than 250 bills that would make it harder to vote. This is more than 7 times the number of restrictive bills as compared to roughly this time last year. These bills primarily seek to limit mail voting and impose stricter voter ID requirements. But the news is not all bad. During the same time frame, pro-voter legislators, often in the very same state houses, are pushing back, seeking to make permanent the changes that led to the biggest voter turnout in over a century. in a different set of 43 states, legislators have carried over, pre-filed, or introduced more than 700 bills that, if enacted, would make it easier for people to vote. So these bills primarily seek to expand access to mail voting and early voting, and ease voter registration, and restore voting rights to persons with past convictions. So this slide, I think everyone has heard, these are the outrageous provisions that have been put forward in these 3 states. And these outrageous provisions are getting a lot of press. But there are other provisions, and these are the dangerous, what we're calling the dangerous provisions, that would have the greatest impact, including all of these that you're seeing on your screen. So again, what can you do? If you know people in states where restrictive legislation is pending, ask them to call or email their own legislators. Another thing, I can't believe I'm saying this, but contribute to organizations, contribute to the League of Women Voters as well, but contribute to the organizations that are going to be fighting these laws in the court. So that's the ACLU, Lawyers for Civil Rights, the League of Women Voters US, and many other organizations at the national and state levels. So now we're going to turn to Massachusetts. Massachusetts likes to think of itself as a progressive state that honors the right to vote, but Massachusetts has historically been behind other states in adopting election reforms to make it easier to vote. A few years ago, North Carolina was repealing election reforms that Massachusetts had never even enacted. So we don't have same-day voter registration, and 21 other states do. So that's just an example. Massachusetts offered early in-person voting for the first time in a presidential election in 2016. In-person early voting during state primary election was available for the first time last September. So that's just a couple of examples of where Massachusetts has lagged behind. There's a provision in the Massachusetts Constitution that allows absentee voting in only 3 instances, right? So you have to have a disability, you have to be unable to get to the poll that day because you're out of town, or you have to have a religious reason why you can't go to the polls. So it'll take a constitutional amendment to give us no excuse absentee voting, and this is at least a 5-year process. My understanding is that the Constitutional Convention, Massachusetts just had it yesterday. They recessed it almost as soon as they started it. But my understanding is that the bill that we needed to be on the calendar was on the calendar. So that preserves our right to challenge, if there is a court challenge, to mail-in voting, which we fully expect will happen. So early voting by mail is sort of an alternative to absentee ballots. And we are expecting that there'll be a constitutional challenge to that if we get our Votes Act passed. Some states have voting centers where a voter can vote at a convenient location, perhaps near work, with the center printing that voter-specific ballot on demand. Boston is experimenting with this kind of a program for early voting, but by and large, Massachusetts, you can only vote in your precinct. But once again, I feel like I should say that we are making progress in Massachusetts. Everyone knows that we passed a law for early voting, online voter registration, teen pre-registration, and several other things in 2014. And we adopted automatic voter registration in 2018. And of course, last year, the legislature moved quickly to pass a law making it easy to vote by mail during the pandemic. So that was a huge push forward. And that brings us to the Votes Act. So the Votes Act stands for an act to foster voting opportunities, trust, equity, and security. And believe me, we spent a lot of time on what we would call this because the name matters. And what the Votes Act will do is, in a nutshell, it would codify and make permanent in the law all of the pandemic reforms that are in place now, and that law expires at the end of June. So we're looking to make all of that permanent. So the first part of the Votes Act will make permanent, as I said, many of the measures that are now in place on an emergency basis. And these include all of the things that you see on your screen. I won't read them all out. So we're proposing same-day registration already in practice in 21 states. It would, let's see, the Votes Act will require risk-limiting audits after all regular state primary and general elections. This is considered the gold standard for audits, and it's something that we really need to enact. One of the things that's my particular pet peeve is that the Votes Act would require Massachusetts to join the Electronic Registration Information Center by June 30th of 2022. The reforms that we passed in 2018 dictated that the Secretary of State join ERIC, but he still has not done so. So this is a ERIC is a nonprofit organization with the sole mission of assisting states to improve the accuracy of their voter rolls and increase access to voter registration for all eligible citizens. 30 states have joined it, including the District of Columbia, Georgia, Florida, and Texas. And the New England member states are Connecticut and Rhode Island. So we really need to put the fire to Bill Galvin's feet to join ERIC. The other thing, this is sort of a technical thing, it would fix the automatic voter registration practice at the Registry of Motor Vehicles, so it actually complies with the law that was passed in 2018. Right now, the RMV offers people the chance to opt out of registering to vote right at the registry, but that's not what the law says. The law states that the RMV must transmit the voter registration information to elected officials, who then notify people that they have been automatically registered to vote, and then they give them the choice to opt out. So you're supposed to be automatically registered when you interact with the RMV or other state agencies like Mass Health. And then finally, to sort of finish up, there are many other voting bills besides the Votes Act that will be introduced this session or have been introduced this session. And these are just the ones that you see on your screen are just several examples, all of which, make it easier for people to vote, not harder. So I just leave you with, many of you were on the call, the lobby day yesterday for the Votes Act. Please email your own senator and representative and ask them to support it, to support the Votes Act. We're really trying to, bring this to a vote before the end of June, which is when the current law expires, because we don't want municipalities who are having their elections in the fall to wonder what the heck is the state of the law. And the other thing is, we've been encouraging people to do is to write a letter to the editor noting how much people like voting by mail and the fact that we need to make that permanent. So I will stop there. Thank you for your indulgence, and ask, if people have questions, and hopefully I'll do my best to answer them. And I will stop sharing my screen. Should I just read out these questions from the chat, Sue?
Yes, go ahead, Patty.
Okay. So Flo's question is, why is Galvin not implementing ERIC? I really don't know. My understanding is that the secretary has, I think what a lot of times the excuse that he gives is that there's not enough money, there's no money to do it. But my understanding, and Flo, you might know better than me, is that he does have the funds that he needs to join it. And I don't really know. Maybe he's going to be embarrassed about the state of the voter rolls in Massachusetts. I really don't know what the holdup is. But the problem is that without giving such a deadline and without putting some teeth into that, this could go on for ages. So that's why we put the provision in that bill. Is there any move to address the lack of sunshine laws for the Mass Legislature, Governor's Office, and the state police? The league the Massachusetts League has just compiled all of the bills that it will be following. I'm almost positive that there are a couple of those kinds of bills that are in our bailiwick this year, but I don't know for sure. But I would encourage you to go. I think they're now posted on our website, so please look there and get in touch with whoever the legislative specialist is for that bill, and they will have much more information than I would on that. So how is the league and other advocacy organizations addressing various states' voting restriction laws to the Supreme Court? So again, I think because the way that we divide the work in terms of, you all probably know this, there, the National League deals with the national issues, all the state leagues deal with their own state issues, and the local leagues deal with their local issues. My understanding is that the League of Women Voters US is a major player at the table in terms of litigation, and that they do have a seat at the table in terms of the litigation that will be happening around the voter restriction laws. So what typically happens is the US League partners with whichever state league is involved, wherever the voter suppression issues are happening, and they coordinate their response, and if it's going to be litigation, they coordinate their litigation with the state that's involved. So it's sort of like a two-pronged approach. Here in Massachusetts, thankfully, at least to my knowledge, there isn't any outright voter suppression bills being introduced to the legislature. So we don't have to get involved in that, but that's how I think that the US and the other leagues around the state deal with it. Do you see that membership is growing statewide? Do you see activism increasing? That's a great question. Yes, typically for the League of Women Voters Massachusetts, we did have an increase in membership. I wouldn't say, and I should say, I've only been in this job for 1.5 years, so I'm still relatively new. My understanding is that right after the 2016 election, my understanding is that membership shot up hugely. And I know it did I know the ACLU was inundated, and other organizations, had massive requests to get involved. And we, in this year, we just did our membership rosters, as you know, everyone was involved in that, as of February 1. And overall, we did have an increase in membership. I wouldn't say it was, hugely significant, but there was an overall increase. And activism increasing, I mean, one of the major impetuses, I think, for the state league going forward is to really try to be expanding with younger audiences, younger and more diverse audiences. So that's going to be you'll hear about this at convention. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is sort of a lens that we're trying to apply to everything. And I have been involved just recently with some talks at Babson College. One of the women who directs the Women's Entrepreneurial Leadership Program there, she was our MC actually for our 100th anniversary, and we have continued that conversation with her, and we're working on setting up what we hope will be a pilot program at Babson for engaging their students in the issues of democracy. So they seem really gung-ho. We've had a couple focus groups with the faculty there. And they seem very gung-ho about their students being interested in getting involved in the league and what the league works on. So the idea is I guess the answer is yes, I think young people are, and we just had over 100 applications for our summer internship. And this is an internship that pays $1,000. I mean, it's not a lot of money. So I think people are very interested. And I would say that, the younger generation, the people that are in their 20s and early 30s now, are very interested. So the trick is to sort of get them involved. They have a lot of opportunities, right? They have a lot of choices, but the trick is to kind of get them to gravitate toward the league. So we hope that our Babson, what we're doing at Babson, eventually might be able to be spun out to other colleges. So we will certainly keep you posted on how we do on that. Yes, public hearing for the Votes Act. So we heard today that there will be a public hearing on the Votes Act next Wednesday, and the tentative time is 1 to 5 p.m. I don't know if that's even been posted yet. This was like inside baseball that somebody heard from somebody. So, but it was good enough. I think it was official enough that it is happening next Wednesday, 1 to 5. So we will certainly post that on the homepage of our website, probably tomorrow once we have the details. And folks may know that the State League is involved in the Election Modernization Coalition, along with the ACLU of Massachusetts, Common Cause, several other organizations. So we will be on a panel. I think I'm actually going to be testifying. Nancy Brumback is unavailable that day. So we'll be on a panel giving oral testimony. We will, of course, be submitting written testimony on that as well. But there'll be more information on our homepage tomorrow on the hearing. And it will be done by Zoom, so people can tune in. Is there a way to email the entire committee with one email message? The election laws committee? Sure. I think, well, I don't know if the committee, that's a good question. I'm not sure if the committee itself has an email address or if you would have to email each individual that's on the committee, but I can find that out and let you know. Sue, I can email you that information.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yep. I think that might be it. I think that might be all the questions. Does anyone else have a question?
If anybody else has a question and you'd like to ask it, just unmute yourself and do that. Okay, hearing none and seeing nobody waving their hands crazily at me, I'm going to say thank you so much, Patty. That was terrific information, and we'll definitely be using all of it going forward. When I get that information from you, I will pass it on to the rest of the members.
Yes, definitely. And thank you all for, participating in the lobby day yesterday, and stay tuned for more action alerts that will be coming your way.
Yeah, we're always tuned into action alerts, no doubt about that.
Thanks again for having me.
Sure, thanks for showing up.
Okay.
It's great.
Good night. Good night.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. See you.